Hello and welcome to Never Mind the Ballots Election Countdown with me, Kate Ferguson. There's just 14 days to go till Britain heads to the polls. Adding another notch to the PM's belt of woes is a massive string of opinion polls that predict Tory wipeout at the next election. One even predicts they will be reduced to just 57 seats. So, is it game over for the Tories? I'll be joined by a senior Conservative minister, Steve Baker, to ponder all this. Subscribe to youtube.com/@SunElection and never miss a thing. This is Never Mind the Ballots Election Countdown. I'm joined by the Sun on Sunday's political correspondent, Sophia Slay, today. And joining us from down the line in High Wycombe is the senior Tory minister, Steve Baker. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm delighted to be with you. Thank you.
Thanks. I mean, we've had a flood of those big polls, those big MRP polls yesterday, and they are suggesting some pretty grim news for the Tories. How would you sum up things on the doorstep for you?
It wouldn't. Well, on the doorstep for me, what I'm finding is that Conservative voters have softened, and what they're telling me is not that they want a Labour government, that they'd like a better Conservative government. So I think it's all going to be in the turnout. And if voters decide they'd rather stick with me and stick with the Conservative Party, then I could even win despite the polls based on what people are saying on the doorsteps. But quite honestly, I couldn't tell you whether I would win or lose by 5,000 right now. I think it's going to be extremely unpredictable.
Those big MRP polls are predicting a massive Labour landslide. One of the polls, I think it's the Savanta poll, says the Tory Party will be reduced to just 57 MPs after that election. Is it just a matter of kind of stemming the losses for your party now, Steve?
Well, no, I wouldn't say that. I mean, this isn't first and foremost about the Conservative Party, it's about the country. And I have to tell you, after 14 years' experience in Parliament, if the Labour Party has a majority as large as has been suggested by some of those polls, then they will go practically without scrutiny. And that's extremely serious for the whole country. I'm afraid Parliament does matter, and it does matter that questions are asked of the government. It does matter that select committees have good quality members on them asking serious questions of the government. And, I'm afraid if it's a landslide of the scales those polls predict, then Labour's power would be practically untrammelled and under scrutinised. And that would be a very serious moment for our country.
I mean, the reality, though, surely must be that the idea of a Tory majority now is just for the birds, isn't it?
I think it would be foolhardy for anyone to come on and suggest that we were confident of winning. But, I don't want to talk down the Conservative Party's prospects. I think the reality here in Wycombe is that the public don't want a Labour government. The Conservative voters here, they would like a good quality Conservative government. And, if they return me to Parliament, I will strain every sinew to give them the Conservative Party that they want and the government that they want. If you look at the set of problems that we have, I don't think Conservative voters in Wycombe think the Labour Party is ever going to be the answer to those problems. And it would be ironic indeed if we ended up with a real landslide to Labour. When it's quite possible they don't really know what they're going to do. And I think their ideological approach probably condemns them to failure along with the whole country. So it would be a bitter irony to have such a landslide and then to fail spectacularly, which I think the Labour Party is always likely to do.
We'll get on to Labour in a minute, but what's gone so wrong for your party in this election campaign? You've dropped points. You had that big manifesto launch. People were barely talking about it a day later. What's gone wrong here?
Well, I think I'll save the post-mortem for afterwards, but, it's going to be a very difficult time for the Conservative Party. If we suffer a very bad loss on the scales in those polls, there is going to be a real period of grieving with recriminations and anger and denial and so on, all the usual process of grief. And it's going to be very, very difficult to get through. So I don't want to start it now. But I would say to the public, please do think extremely carefully, as I know people do, about the choices we face and the consequences of untrammelled Labour power. I mean, it's a real possibility from those polls. It would be extremely bad for the country. And, it's really not for my sake that I ask people to vote Conservative, please.
Steve, you made headlines earlier in this campaign because you went on holiday to Greece after the election was called. Was that a mistake, given just how grim the polls are now? Should you have stayed in your patch and campaigned?
Well, I went on holiday and did all the work that needed to be done that week. In the end, you can't deliver leaflets until they've been printed. And, the calling cards I had said MP on them and so forth. So I did all the work that needed to be done. I'd made promises to a friend and to my wife that I'd be going on holiday. It was a snap election. And after consulting my chairman, we agreed that all round, me doing 5 hours a day on holiday to get through all the work that was necessary was a good thing. And I've come back refreshed and ready to go on. The fact is, my campaign started long ago. We hired my campaign manager a year ago. We've been knocking on doors and talking to people for a year. And, having a week off in which I worked 5 hours a day hasn't done a bit of damage to my campaign. And after 14 years, I think the public in Wickham know who I am and what I stand for.
I wanted to pick your brains a little bit, Steve, about Nigel Farage, because a lot of our viewers and readers will know you as I think you were dubbed the Brexit hardman, weren't you? You were a big campaigner, a big figure in those Brexit wars, getting Brexit through. What do you reckon to Nigel Farage's return to the political stage?
Unfortunately, the way Nigel Farage speaks, particularly about minorities, is extremely unhelpful and toxifies a number of debates. And I particularly called him out in relation to what he said about Muslims. Some of my best supporters and pillars of the community here in Wickham are British Muslims. The High Sheriff of Buckinghamshire is British Muslim. We've had mayors, senior councillors, the chairman of council, justices of the peace, head teachers. These are pillars of our community. And yeah, I know people are worried about the rise of political Islam, but quite honestly, when I go to the mosques here, I find senior figures in the mosques here worried about the rise of political Islam. So Nigel's an exemplar of a mistake that people make. They worry about radicals and then they tarnish the reputation of a whole community, and that's quite wrong. My approach is to stand with the good people, and then together we can call out that which is wrong and condemn it, and then move forward as a whole community. So that's really my beef with Nigel. He says things which are extremely unhelpful and which are in danger of really, in the end, spreading alarm amongst members of the public quite unjustifiably. We've worked a long time in Wickham to have high levels of community integration and cohesion. As I say, some of my best friends and supporters here, the people on whom I rely, who I trust, are British Muslims, and they deserve to be treated better than Nigel and others treat them. So where there are problems, we should deal with them, but not the way Nigel does.
Are you accusing Nigel there of being, what, dog whistle, maybe even racist? What are you saying
I don't want to allow you to put words in my mouth. All I would just say is that over the course of the time I've worked with him, and it was me who reached out to Richard Tice and Nigel Farage at the 2019 election and began the process of persuading them not to run candidates against incumbents. And that was the right decision in the national interest. And I opened that meeting by congratulating Nigel on what he'd achieved, and he had achieved a huge amount. And on that occasion, he took the right decision. If he'd stood everywhere, he could have handed the country to Jeremy Corbyn, and he took the right decision in the national interest there and behaved like a real statesman. So the last thing I want to do is get into a war of words with him. But I just would say that from my perspective, I'm obviously only a candidate now, but after 14 years of being an elected representative in Parliament, working with all sections of a very diverse community, seeing how all sections of this community add to our society, add value, fit in, work together, promote peace and prosperity, I'm afraid I am very, very disappointed when people with big voices unnecessarily tarnish the reputations of good and innocent people. And I think it has to be said, I parted company with Suella over very much the same issue. It is not acceptable to tarnish the reputations of innocent and good people over realistic concerns about a wicked minority. We need to call out bad behaviour, not speak too easily in condemning others. And it's really important as we go on to treat people well.
OK. I'm glad that you mentioned the 2019 decision, because I was interviewing Nigel earlier this week and he mentioned standing the Brexit Party candidates down. He said he was offered 10 peerages to dole out to his allies, and he was offered a knighthood as part of that deal. Now, he says that was corruption. He rejected it, was furious that he was offered it. He didn't name names as to who offered it, but could you enlighten us today? Do you know who made him that offer, or if indeed that offer was made?
I have absolutely no idea. I opened the conversation with Nigel, and then others will have been involved. But no, that would be news to me. I know nothing of that. And certainly, I did it as a backbencher, just on my own initiative, opening the conversation and then handing it on. So I know nothing of that. But it would obviously be very disappointing. But, my appeal to Nigel was based on principle and the best interests of the country, and Nigel reacted to that. So, I think the interaction that he and I had was one we could be proud of, because we were talking about the best interests of the UK. And certainly as a backbencher, I would have been in no position to be offering knighthoods, and nor would I do so. So, and I don't think somebody like Nigel Farage, for all the disagreements I may have with him, he's not the sort of man to be purchased for a knighthood when the issue at stake is the future of the United Kingdom outside the EU. And I think anyone who suggested otherwise would be kidding themselves. But yeah, I lament that he and I have our disagreements, but for the reasons I've given, he's not somebody I would want to work with.
Some people in your party, Steve, says you should have brought Nigel into the fold. And that would have avoided the rise of reform. It would have avoided this huge poll bounce they've got. And you guys would be better shape now going into this election, or the final furlong of these elections. What do you think to that? Was there a place for Nigel Farage in the Conservative Party?
Well, not while he continues to speak of minorities in the way that he does. And I would just observe that, as far as I know, one of the people who said that of Nigel was Suella. And much as I don't wish to get into a row with Suella, I parted company with her over the way she dealt with a very sensitive issue, tarnishing the reputations of a wider community. And it's just not acceptable in our country to do that. So, I can see how Suella and I would have a different view about Nigel Farage's place in the Conservative Party.
Can I just clarify what it was Suella said that you disagree so wholeheartedly with?
It was in relation to grooming gangs. And again, what we should have done is stand together with a decent majority across all sections of the community in condemning criminality. And if Suella had sought to do that on that occasion, if she'd said that those criminals had let us all down, and that all sections of the community, decent people in all sections of the community, stood together in condemning them, then she could have united our community. Instead, what she did was create enormous offence, and understandably so. So, I think a number of big voices in politics should have much more concern for calling out evil behaviour by individuals and doing so without collectively condemning people. It's an old mistake in politics. It's quite wrong, and we should rise above it.
I wanted to ask you about those shocking images we saw yesterday of Just Stop Oil spraying that orange kind of paint on Stonehenge. We can see a clip now of that vandalism. What's your response to that, Steve?
They're vandals, they're criminals. They should face the full force of the law. I mean, to be doing this, it's just ignorant. It's disrespectful of our institutions, of our monuments, of our culture, of our country. And it's totally unjustifiable. And for people basically who've won the argument, I mean, all of our parties are now pro-green, and for people who've won the argument, it's really quite idiotic to be doing this. And they should certainly face the full force of the law.
Your colleague Simon Hoare tweeted yesterday, I think we've just got that for the viewers. He says they're no better than ISIS, these Just Stop Oil vandals. Do you agree with that statement?
Well, I think that's for Simon to answer, but I would just say that ISIS have been killing people, whereas Just Stop Oil are merely vandals. So I'm a bit hesitant to go down that path with Simon, but I would certainly encourage you to ask him about it.
There's some quite big public figures who have ties to Just Stop Oil. I'm thinking here of Dale Vince. He's a big Labour donor. I think he's appeared on this show, actually, to share his political beliefs. He's also previously funded Just Stop Oil. I mean, acts like this, should this influence what Dale Vince does? Should he stop funding them? Should the Labour need to distance themselves more from him?
Well, I think anybody who cares about the civilised conduct of politics and the quality of public life, the quality of all our lives, should distance themselves from anyone who conducts their politics in that way. I think what my electors want here in Wickham is decent, civilised, moderate politics. Well, certainly Conservative voters want it robustly on the centre-right, but they expect us to behave with civility and good manners, and that does not include the kind of behaviour of Just Stop Oil. And I think anyone involved with them should withdraw all their support. And if they don't do so, we should say, well, you make it clear what kind of politics you stand for, and I want nothing to do with it. So, yeah, I mean, I would appeal to anyone to stay on the ground of whatever their politics, to be moderate in their conduct, lawful in their conduct, civilised and polite. And common sense viewers of your programme, readers of The Sun, they will expect decent, normal, civilised conduct from other people, just as they conduct themselves. So this kind of nonsense needs to be stopped, and the full force of the law should be applied.
I wanted to ask you about small boats. We saw, I think, over 800 people on small boats yesterday arrive over the Channel. That's a shocking figure, isn't it? Hasn't your government failed to grip this issue?
I think the reality is that the refugee treaties and the jurisprudence of the ECHR have put us in a bind. So that, as people will know, we've legislated and legislated again. We've got to a position where there is a clear plan to get the flights going and to introduce that deterrent effect. And that is what will happen if there's a Conservative government. If there's a Labour government, they will stop those flights and there will be no deterrent to people coming. And insofar as Labour have expressed a plan, they'll do what we're already doing, of bring all the relevant players together to stop those boats. But look, what's in our manifesto is renegotiating those refugee treaties. And the Prime Minister's also been very clear that nothing's off the table in relation to the ECHR. And when I look at the convention rights, they're entirely laudable, but when you look at the way that they're applied, we've ended up in a bind that we can't simply uphold the reasonable policy of stopping illegal immigration which promotes criminal gangs and puts people's lives at risk, quite wrongly. So, you know, we have to do what is necessary, but I'm afraid that is going to involve renegotiating out-of-date international treaties. And it may, in the ultimate analysis, require us to leave the ECHR. But that is a big step, which would involve, once again, a lot of division, and I would like to avoid that. But I'm afraid Labour have got nothing to offer here. There must be a deterrent to crossing illegally over the Channel. That deterrent is our Rwanda policy. And if we form the government, then the flights will go.
Is that ECHR, is that basically a broken convention now? You know, should your party actually have been a bit bigger, a bit bolder and said, look, we're going to leave this?
Not at this stage, no. I think it's right that it's on the table that we could. But let's just be clear that the Council of Europe, it's not the European Union. The Council of Europe is an important institution, bigger than the European Union. If it was properly carried forward, it would be something that I would be able to support. I mean, the rights in the convention, anyone can read. They're set out in plain English: right to life, right to a private and family life. And it's worth remembering that during the first half of the 20th century, these basic fundamental human rights collapsed. And not just in Germany, but they collapsed into totalitarian Soviet Union as well. So it is worth remembering that in recent history, those rights collapsed, and those rights must be upheld. Whatever happens, come what may, we must uphold those rights. But what's gone wrong is that the jurisprudence, the judgments of the court, have led us into a position where it's very difficult to, in some circumstances, to carry forward reasonable policy. So it's going to be a tricky one to navigate this, but what we have to have is a robust and determined government, a government determined to deliver on controlling migration and making sure that it is lawful. So, you know, again, please vote Conservative.
Steve, I wanted to ask you one last question before I let you go. It's been a very tumultuous few years for the Conservative Party. Theresa May was obviously ousted by her Tory MPs, Boris Johnson the same. Liz left after about a month of her own volition, but after that turbulence. I wonder, thinking back about Theresa May and Boris Johnson now, was it a mistake to oust them from number 10, do you think?
I think it's water under the bridge. And I think what I would say, moreover, is that events plus social media have really accelerated the way that public debate runs. And, you know, goodness knows I've been central to some of that at times, which I don't regret, because what I did I still believe was necessary and overall for the national interest.
So you have no regrets about your role in Boris's downfall, Theresa May's downfall earlier?
I didn't really have a role in Boris Johnson's downfall. I said I thought he should go, but that was very much representing the balanced views of my electors. But that was very, very sad. I certainly didn't campaign against him. And if I had not done what I did in relation to Theresa May, I'm quite sure the Conservative Party would have been smashed and we would have been under the rule of Jeremy Corbyn and John McDonnell. So it's very difficult for me to regret what I did, but I do regret that it was necessary. But I think what everyone should just really reflect on is that there are always going to be high political events and dramas. Things are going to happen. And in an environment of social media and WhatsApp, communications happens a lot faster, and that prevents people really thinking. And I'm afraid that's what we all face. And even if there is a large Labour majority, the combination of events and social media and human frailty mean, I'm afraid, in the new age and era that we live in, there's always going to be political chaos in the news. And what we have to do is come up with a better way as politicians of navigating it thoughtfully and moderately so that we can deal with the great challenges which lie ahead.
OK, Steve, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Thank you. OK, right, let's cut to Sophia now, joining me from The Sun on Sunday. Thanks so much for joining me today, Sophia. So what did you make of that? I was struck by the comments Steve said about Nigel Farage there. He says there's no place for him in the Conservative Party because of comments he's made about the Muslim community. What did you make of that?
Yeah, I thought it was quite interesting. My overall sort of take was, you know, the hard man of Brexit is actually maybe a little bit of a softie underneath. In regards to the Farage comments, Nigel Farage, he used the word toxic. He said he didn't like the way that Nigel has spoken about Muslims in particular. On the flip side, I'd also point out that Steve Baker has quite a sizable Muslim population. So perhaps rather than speaking to the country as a whole, was Steve speaking directly to his constituents as he sort of battles to hold on to his seats. But I thought it was quite interesting. This is a conversation that Tory MPs are having right now. Do we accept Nigel Farage in the future? Because he's a big problem for them.
Yeah, exactly. OK, Sophia, thanks so much. We'll come back to you in a minute. And I think we're just going to moments of the day now. Now it's time to look at our moments of the days. And here's a clip of Nigel lighting up the campaign trail in Clacton.
Shady's back. Tell a friend. Guess who's back? Guess who's back? Guess who's back?
OK, Sophia, so this is Nigel Farage. He's addressing this kind of big rally in Clacton on Tuesday night. Eminem playing in the background, fireworks on stage. What do you reckon to that?
It's taking me back to being a teenager, that song. But he's obviously having a great time, really enjoying this, and he's getting a base. You know, he's got a base out there celebrating and having a great time.
I mean, Nigel says he's going to raise this kind of people's army, and he's starting in Clacton. He's talking about revolution, insurrection. How big a kind of disruptor is Nigel about to be in this election?
He certainly feels like a major disruptor right now. The thing is, when we get to polling day, do those traditional Tories that's so angry, saying they're going to vote reform, peel back and say, actually, we're going to back the Tories, we don't want a Labour government? That's the big question, isn't it?
I'm going to put you on the spot here, but what do you reckon? Do you think that the Tories, kind of a group of them, could actually merge with reform? Could we see Nigel kind of take over the right of the Tory party and rebrand it in his own image?
That's definitely a massive fear for some. I think some would like that, but I think the majority that will be left after the general election probably won't want that to happen.
I guess it depends who's standing.
Exactly.
If those polls are to be believed, it could be as few as 57.
Exactly.
Kind of what wing of the party they're from. And I think we've had some wags of Westminster out of the campaign trail. So here we can see Akshata Murthy, who's obviously Rishi Sunak's wife. There she is with James Cleverly's wife, Lucy Fraser, the Culture Secretary, and Jeremy Hunt's wife. So the kind of wags hitting the campaign trail. What do you reckon? Are they going to give the footballers' wags a bit of a run for their money?
I'm not quite sure about that, but it was quite nice to see a bit of like some pops of colour, right? Because all the main leaders are male, right? They're all quite technocratic guys. It's quite nice to see the ladies out, to be honest. I thought, a bit of colour.
Is this a bit of a like backward step though? Just that the wives' clubs out, you know, kind of in their kind of carefully picked outfits, carefully orchestrated photo call. Like, is this what women should be doing in the 21st century?
I mean, it wouldn't be for me. I wouldn't do it. I found it a little bit patronising. But, you know, like I said, it's good to see them out and about. And it's quite nice to see Susie Cleverly. She's been through a lot. She's had, you know, cancer treatment and stuff like that. So it was great to see her out and about, really.
Thanks so much, Sophia. Thank you to Steve Baker and Sophia Slay for joining me today. This was Never Mind the Ballots Election Countdown. And remember to subscribe to us on youtube.com/@SunElection to watch more. And do not forget to join us on Monday, June 24th, live at 5:30 p.m. We've got the Prime Minister Rishi Sunak and Leader of the Opposition Keir Starmer here live for a showdown from the Sun HQ. It will be streamed on sun.co.uk and our Sun's YouTube channel.